Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A husband was in a coma and his wife was discussing beside him. Details. Today's installment of a story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. His eyes were empty, wide, and lifeless. The tubes rhythmically sucked in air while alarming hissing sounds were periodically heard. Crying uncontrollably, my mind flashed back, replaying vivid images of the last 8 hours. Oh my God, what have I done? That damn Karl, he has been my husband's best friend since elementary school. Why did I do this? Well, yes, he is 6 feet 5 inches tall, muscular, and a blonde Swedish Apollo, but I love my husband. Karl is simply a pure man, but with little intelligence. His ability to please were good, at least that's the excuse I'm clinging to now. My husband is a brilliant man, handsome and caring. He worships the ground I walk on, he bottles the air I breathe. And yet, I consider him insignificant. He looks like an average Joe, only his name is Jack. Average Jack pales in comparison to Karl, at least in appearance. But my Jack, despite his average height and simple looks, is a very smart and extremely rich man. His personal fortune extends to the farthest corners of the globe. Okay, he inherited most of his wealth, but some Wall Street analysts will tell you that in the 5 short years since receiving his inheritance at age 21, he has nearly doubled it. Now, I admit quite bashfully that I was a fortune hunter. I have been blessed with feminine proportions that fit most straight men's idea of perfection. And if that definition includes long red hair and deep emerald green eyes, then that is up for debate. But that is what God and my Irish roots have blessed me with. I'm relatively tall for a girl at 5 feet 9 inches, and in 4-inch heels, I look down on 6-foot-tall men. Some people compare me to a young Nicole Kidman, like in that racing movie she was in. So, again, I shamefully admit that I spent my later teenage years preying on rich men. I would purposely attend popular clubs or events dressed head to toe in a ridiculously short dress or sparkly tunic that would attract the attention of my weakened, unsuspecting prey. Don't get me wrong, I'm not completely stupid. I completed a bachelor's degree in journalism, but it was more about vanity than any real desire to pursue this profession. The title carried prestige and offered access to famous events in interesting places. Not that I'd ever been hired for a job, but a fake press card and real references, a killer miniskirt, and, well, you get the picture. Of course, I read gossip and scrolled through BRW or Forbes because I'm always on the hunt, looking for that special man who might notice me. Fall in love with me, a tall, slender, red-haired girl in a little green sequin dress with an indecent slit and stupidly high heels that could twist your ankle. 3 years ago, I noticed a rather simple but at the same time handsome guy sitting alone at a bar in Wentworth. The site was the annual investor meeting of Millennium Corp, a global real estate development company that owns some of the world's most expensive properties. I found out about this while scrolling through Forbes. Now, thanks to my research skills, I also learned that this simple nobody swirling his whiskey was Jack Stevens, CEO of U.S. Incorporated External Developments. It was one of his 6 companies, but the one that dealt with shares. The day I walked into that bar was my 21st birthday, and to say I felt confident and lucky is an understatement. It was my birthday, and I was on a roll. I quickly walked towards the marble floor in search of my prey when suddenly, a large guy lazily appeared in my path, blocking the sunlight pouring through the huge windows overlooking Central Park. "Excuse me, madam, can I help you with something today?" He sounded like a bear, a big black bear with a rough voice who ate my porridge. I tried to get around him, but he was too fast for such a big man. "I'm trying to meet my boyfriend, Jack. If you'll let me pass, sir." I tried to impress him with my smile, which conveyed both humor and disbelief. "If I may, madam, I have strict instructions to expel anyone not associated with the convention. Your pass, please." He didn't even bother holding out his hand in anticipation, the arrogant idiot. "Jack, honey, this man doesn't believe who I am." I screamed in despair, thinking that I only had one chance. The big guy looked surprised and turned to look at my prey, seeming confused by my apparent familiarity. Jack Stevens, in turn, looked up from his thoughts, somewhat surprised to hear his name. I took the opportunity to step around the gorilla and rush towards my stunned captain, holding out my arms and crying out, "Jack! Tell him who I am, honey. Yes, yes. Brave, daring, well, fight me. I heard the big guy rush after me. Jack Stevens barely had time to stand up before I hugged him and whispered in his ear, "Oh honey, this man is so terrible." "I'm sorry, sir. She's very fast." "It's okay, Bobby. She's with me." Jack Stevens's eyes sparkled. "Are you okay, my princess?" "Maybe." I smiled, but that smile was a distant memory. My Jack was broken. That first date spent at his bedside, holding his lifeless hand, was the first of many. I had a lot of time to reflect on my actions, drown in my guilt, and curse myself for my indescribable stupidity. The consequences of my actions will be felt for centuries and will change fate. What has been done cannot be undone. The pain may heal, but the scars will remain. I pressed my cold, limp hand to my cheek and cried bitterly for my loving husband, Jack Stevens. 5 years, 8 months, and 22 days later, on May 6, 2003, a strange and eerie feeling suddenly came over me. A feeling of déjà vu rushed through my melted brain as if I had seen it before. The darkness transformed like the dawn coming on the darkest of nights. I remembered the dream at that moment and what that feeling once was and what it meant: sleep closing my day, surrendering to the soft emptiness and random sleep. But this dream seemed endless when this strange semblance of light began to approach my horizon. My memory began to return in this brief reflection of the past. I introduced my princess. She was in my arms, hugging me and seeking my protection. The concierge looked puzzled as I hugged her and nodded, confirming that she was fine and that everything was okay. Indeed, everything was fine. I sat at the bar, lost in my own shortcomings. Despite my wealth and luck, approaching a woman felt like the Apollo 13 mission to the moon. I would circle around my supposed goal with all systems on the verge of failure, never demonstrating my potential to love or care for a woman. Internally, I was broken, and dwelling was the maximum I could achieve. I plunged into the dark side with every failed attempt. Communication eluded me, and worst of all, my equipment was broken, destroying any possible confidence in achieving my goal. I was unlucky enough to get cancer as a teenager, and a subsequent operation left me half capable of ever producing an heir. When subsequent tests showed that this was impossible, displaying a null result, I retreated into my comfortable shell of shortcomings, considering myself less than a man. Approaching girls was unthinkable, and every time I managed to be in the presence of one, I retreated back into my shell, thinking that I could never allow a woman with misfortune to know me, let alone love me. Then my princess ran into my arms that fateful day, and everything changed. "Are you okay? Did that big man scare you?" Yes, it was alcohol, but her perfume and feminine scent overwhelmed me. God, she smelled so feminine. The lunar module separated and began its descent. She stepped back and blinked, her eyelashes the color of autumn, flashing with sparkling emeralds. Their depth was oceanic. "No, he's a big teddy bear." She looked over her shoulder at the departing giant. "Thanks for not giving me away. Can I buy you a drink?" She smiled, and her face became brighter than the dawn. I laughed. That should have been my line. I invited the bartender over, inviting this stunning beauty to order. "I'd like blurred pleasure, please." She grinned and winked. "What's up, princess?" I asked curiously. There are a lot of other rich guys here, and some of them were pretty good looking. A girl like you could attract anyone. I took a shot of J.D. more in an attempt to hide my excitement than my desire to drink it. "Okay, so have you figured me out, mister? Do you think I'm some kind of woman of easy virtue who wants to grab a rich man and maybe pick his pocket?" She looked disappointed, which surprised me. God, she was intoxicatingly beautiful. I admit that I would like the company of a man, but if you think that I'm looking for more than just intelligent and pleasant conversation, then you have completely mistaken me. This statement was spoken with feeling in what I could only define as sincerity. Those amazing eyes studied mine. Yes, I admit that I would like to meet a rich man and live happily ever after. What girl doesn't dream of that? I'm just a poor simple girl, after all. But any man I intend to spend my life with must be smart, interesting, caring, and loyal. Being rich would certainly be the icing on the cake, but all these other qualities are of paramount importance. She paused to catch her breath. I was frozen, mesmerized. So, Mr. Jack Stevens, if you don't meet any of these requirements and aren't looking for intelligent conversation, tell me now, and let's not waste each other's time. She crossed her arms under her magnificent breasts and sighed. God, how I love determined women. This girl was driving me crazy. Her purple hazy vodka cocktail arrived, complete with a silly umbrella and a lone strawberry floating on a creamy foam on top. Well, that's been stated. Perhaps I should introduce myself. I'm Jack Stevens, but I think you already know that. Miss, I paused, giving her the opportunity. She smiled from behind that damn umbrella. Nice to meet you, Mr. Stevens. I'm Jillian Tomlinson, but everyone calls me Jill. She put down the drink and extended her hand, her eyelids flickering, knowing we had already embraced, but still offering her hand. I took her offer and stupidly turned her hand over and kissed the back of her wrist. You're Jack, and I'm Jill, she laughed, and that was all. I was caught, hauled ashore, and definitely ready to be butchered. Memories of my girl laughing and tucking her gorgeous hair behind her ears as we talked for hours are still etched in my memory, but strangely, little else. This memory of our first meeting and that glorious night spent on the mezzanine is still fresh and seems to have become even fresher, as if my brain was holding onto it, returning to that night again and again as if this memory was the key to this darkness. But the darkness dissipated, light appeared. I heard a sound, and it was a sound I barely recognized, the sound of a human voice, like some foreign language. It penetrated my hazy consciousness. The sound continued in its rhythmic repetition, and awareness finally dawned. Jack! Jack! Can you hear me? Jack! 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 Can you hear me? It made sense. I was Jack, and someone was calling me. Then, the face I had first mistaken for an angelic one materialized, and my preconceived notion of a fluffy white angel turned into a clear vision of shiny black perfection. This angel outshone the picture book angels. Why are angels depicted as white Caucasian blondes? My confession is that the one who was now shaking me and calling me was a beautiful black woman with long, curly black hair framing her smiling face. Oh my God, you're awake. I'll call the doctor. The dark angel had disappeared. I recognized the sounds as words, but I had difficulty understanding their meaning. The light was unbearable, and my mind hurt. The darkness enveloped me again, but I could still hear the sounds. The other voice sounded firm and instructive, while the angel's voice bordered on hysteria. Strange sensations seemed to poke and kick at the edges of my world as a deep voice demanded obedience. Thinking back on that period of inactivity, I now realized that I was experiencing the pain and confusion of waking up from a deep, analgesic sleep. The sensations slowly returned, conscious memory and understanding seeping back into my mind like slow-moving, all-encompassing molasses. My brain sparkled again as life returned. My angel's name was Katie. She was a dark-skinned beauty in white, wearing a St. Augustine memorial uniform. Her magnificent teeth blinded me, but her smile radiated warmth. Large brown eyes studied me carefully. Katie fussed and cared for me with excitement, explaining that I had been asleep for almost 6 years. The news was almost incomprehensible. She explained that I had fallen down the stairs in my house and hit my head, or rather my neck, damaging the reticular activating system. Apparently, the RAS is responsible for consciousness and awakening the body from sleep. My system was damaged, along with further damage to my spinal column. The doctor said my lower body was permanently paralyzed from the hips down, kaput. In any case, it took 3 months to restore any semblance of functionality. It took almost a week and almost constant tears to sink into the reality that I had missed almost 6 years of my life, or at least 6 years of everyone else's life. 3 days later, after that first return to the world that had left me behind, a similar angelic presence seemed to study me. Only this one had porcelain skin and an aura of shiny red hair framing and surrounding her flawless face. Glossy red lips whispered things I didn't understand, and deep green, cat-like eyes looked at me with curiosity. It took time, but that image became my wife. When the realization came, I cried and tried to hug her, desperate to feel her touch and breathe in her essence. Some memories eventually returned, and I remembered her smiling face and those sparkling eyes shining from beneath the lace veil, signaling her joy and utter happiness. Our wedding day was the happiest time of my life, without a doubt. Looking back, I realized that our union worked well, like two pieces of a puzzle discovered by chance and found to fit together. Jill freely admits that she was looking for a rich husband, which would be a more accurate description of a man above his station, as they say. Her own family was poor, barely middle class and broken. Her parents divorced when she was 5, and she hadn't seen her father in over 10 years. On the other hand, I also outweighed my weight class. I knew I was simple, and of course, this magnificent creature could have her pick of any man on the planet. But as she kept repeating, she wanted a loving, caring, faithful man, and of course, he had to be rich. She was not at all ashamed to admit it, and I respected her for being so frank. Jill was a smart woman, so conversation and common interests were paramount. We dated for almost a year, 6 months of which we were engaged. Yes, we just suited each other. Before I proposed, I reluctantly admitted to my problem with dysfunctional plumbing. Don't get me wrong, I can have a night, but we will probably never be able to have children of our own. Jill simply shrugged, saying she wasn't really into kids, but I could tell she was disappointed. We got married privately and spent 3 wonderful years together. I worshipped my wife, and the way her eyes lit up every time she saw me confirmed that she loved me too. Although my work took up valuable time, we still spent quality time together, and Jill was busy setting up our new home, a modern 6-room mansion with security on the North Coast. She organized landscapers and workers who transformed the area to her design and installed a stunning infinity pool. Jill was a natural when it came to decorating and transforming the mansion. Within a year of purchasing the property, the place was spectacular. I was constantly in awe of her abilities, and my beautiful princess beamed with pride and satisfaction. She had built a nest and now seemed content. 2 months spent waking up and adjusting meant we talked a lot, reminiscing about fun times, including our first meeting. The intricacies of that night are still imprinted like carved stone tablets in my memory. The last conversation we had in my hospital room was also set in stone. Jill stood demurely next to my best friend Karl, and both of the people closest to me looked nervous and uneasy. I was afraid of what was going to happen. My best friend Karl and I were complete opposites. We had been friends since school. Karl befriended me when I offered him protection money to defend himself from bullies who seemed to take pleasure in finding someone weaker than themselves. A spoiled little rich kid, dressed impeccably and brought to school in a limousine with a driver, Karl was the son of Swedish immigrants, and his father built a profitable construction company. The profits from this helped send their child to an expensive private school. Karl actually refused to accept my protection money when we went to college, insisting that I help him with his studies instead. The problem was that the guy was so passionate about football that he didn't go to classes at all, so help became unnecessary. He dropped out of school and went to work for his father, eventually getting fired for laziness, foolishly believing that his father would give him a free ride. His dad worked hard for everything he had and expected the same from his son. Karl started his own business as a building contractor but struggled due to a lack of work discipline and focus. I introduced him to Jill before our marriage and invited him to be my best man, which he happily accepted. My wife hired him many times to build a cabana, pool locker rooms, and a very elaborate alfresco and barbecue area. I admit that he did a great job, and Jill was very pleased with the results. I saw him several times sitting quietly by my hospital bed, seemingly examining every piece of plastic tubing, blinking monitors, and an array of writing devices, everyone except me, or at least my eyes. On this day, Jill was wearing a blouse and jeans, and her long, toned legs appeared to be dyed blue denim. Her body was toned and perfect, as if she had been following a strict exercise regimen for the past 5 years. However, her breathing seemed a little strained and slightly raspy. But what made me painfully swallow huge lumps of foul air was the fact that their hands were clasped, their fingers intertwined. "Oh my God, Jack, honey, we have something to tell you." I noticed her knuckles turn white as she tightened her grip on the big man's hand. "The doctors said you'd never recover." I was so lonely and depressed, and Karl was there to comfort me. A tear slid lazily down her cheek, and Jill brushed it away in exasperation. We've been together for over 5 years, she continued quietly. I could only nod stupidly. What could I say, and how should I react to the recognition that the wife I adored, the girl I worshipped, had been with my best friend for 5 years? She went on, we fell in love, and more tears flowed down those beautiful cheeks. I felt dizzy. Karl coughed as if on cue. Jack, I consider you my best friend, but like Jill said, we thought you were dead. He paused, giving me a chance to process Jilly as a term of endearment. We have 2 daughters, Jack. 2 beautiful little girls. My world began to darken. Jess is 4 years old and Jade is almost 2. They would love to meet you, but first, we wanted you to understand the situation. I was stunned, desperately fighting off the thick black curtain eclipsing the world. Jack, we thought you'd never get better, and I'm so sorry, but we had to move on. Jill sounded terribly remorseful, but Karl sounded so smug. Jill, seriously. I mean, I had no choice in terms of moving forward. I was in the hospital, imitating a vegetable for almost 6 years while the people closest to me moved on. I counted, she waited about 6 months before getting pregnant. How long did it take before she found solace in Karl's bed? I bent down, grabbed the jug of water, and tore it out. At least my guts were working. And all Karl said was, "Oh damn, that's just gross, man." Jillian. I cried. He seemed lifeless, only the monitors said otherwise. Cold machines pumped air into my man's throat, and wires and sensors transmitted signals to other equally distant machines that continuously beeped and clicked. My hand rested on his, but he was cold and lifeless. Doctors had deliberately lowered Jack's core body temperature in a desperate attempt to deal with his injuries, which turned out to be minor, some swelling and bruising on the back of his neck and a few minor abrasions, but that was it. And yet my poor husband lay in front of me, unresponsive and devoid of life. Doctors said he may never recover, some kind of damage that affected his ability to wake up occurred to his neck and spine. The coma can last for days, weeks, months, or even, in the worst-case scenario, indefinitely. He may simply fall into a vegetative state forever, dependent on others to care for him. This great mind, this caring and gentle man, reduced to nothing more than a piece of barely functioning human flesh. I cried almost hysterically. What have I done? Less than a few weeks after I first met Jack, he introduced me to his best friend, Karl. The huge blonde Viking took my breath away and made me light up when it would have been inappropriate to do so while praising another man. This guy was Thor mixed with Hercules. I had never seen 2 friends so magnetically opposite. Jill, this is my friend Karl. Karl, this is my girlfriend, Jillian Tomlinson. Jack smiled at my stunned surprise. My eyes darted between the 2 men. Nice to meet you, Karl. I extended my hand, but Karl put his arm around me and the giant crushed me halfway, kissing my cheek as I gasped. Hey, beautiful. Wow, how the hell did my boyfriend find you? He grinned, appraising me, and turned to Jack. I was still coming to my senses. Damn, man. Were you at the Miss World pageant and kidnapped a contestant? Another deep laugh coincided with my blush. Karl turned around again and shamelessly assessed me. The little black dress was slightly out of place. Perhaps the hemline could have been lower, given the circumstances. Suddenly, I felt without anything, and yet I had never felt without anything in front of Jack. This was new. The other problem was that even in my heels, I was still half a head shorter than this blonde bodybuilder, which somehow reduced my normal height excellence over men. I felt small and a little insignificant as he continued to examine my body. Oh my God, you're hot. So how the hell did my boyfriend find you, honey? Oh, for God's sake, Karl, take it easy. You just met her. Jack sounded annoyed. I snuggled up to my boyfriend. Jack always made me feel comfortable with him. I was like candy, and Jack seemed to love it. He liked to hold my hand, showing me off quietly and proudly, as if he were publicly declaring, "Hey, guys, see? It's all mine." But at that moment of meeting Karl, I felt insignificant, without clothes, and vulnerable. Do you use that phrase on all the girls? I tried to be brave. No, baby, no girl I've been with looked like you. His eyes roamed over me again, taking me in. I felt without anything. Jack had always been a lucky guy, and I think I hated him now. I was jealous, of course. He laughed cheekily, took my arm, and announced that it was time to eat. This is Karl. He is cocky, self-confident, and completely devoid of decorum. His dominant aggressiveness excited me during this first dinner. Jack barely had time to get a word in edgewise because Karl and I were talking non-stop, spitting out continuous hints that balanced on flirtation but did not reach the level of intim. I enjoyed discussing art, politics, and world events with Jack, but 90 minutes of idle chit-chat with Karl was refreshing and exciting. I apologized to Jack later, but he simply brushed it off and said that he enjoyed my interaction with Karl as much as I did. He confirmed that Karl was not shy and was a cheeky idiot, but he laughed many times when I put him in his place. You really showed him where he belongs, Jill. He'll never take you for granted again. I enjoyed watching you act, he smiled and stroked me as he drove. I trembled all over and didn't know which man caused this reaction. Having my boyfriend sit quietly while I crossed paths with his best friend, a guy who in another life might have been Zeus, was amazingly intoxicating. The fact that Zeus looked at me like the goddess Diana was even more exciting. Talking complete nonsense was enlightening. The result was that I was excited as hell, and I really needed it. So, that's how it was that night. I finally took Jack to bed. That's why my man didn't have the confidence to lead. It soon became apparent that he lacked experience, not that I had opened up to a lot of guys in college, but I was dipping my toes in the water, so to speak. Okay, maybe I swam, but I'm not a woman of easy virtue. I suspected that Jack might not have had any women before me, but I didn't insist on it. It was that night that I learned the reason for Jack's insecurity. Karl told me a story that he shouldn't have shared, but of course, he did. It was only a week before he proposed that he nervously revealed his inability to become a father. Of course, I asked myself this question but decided to wait until it revealed itself. I was afraid of reality, knowing how much I wanted to be a mother one day. I tried to appear calm, but internally I was wincing. I loved this man, and there were other ways to become a mother and have a family. I hugged him tightly and reassured him that it was no problem. Unsurprisingly, he proposed the following week on Friday. I cried and screamed, yes. I opened a little Cartier box, put on the ring, and pounced on him. I was supposed to be Mrs. Jack Stevens. Karl was invited to be the best man, and this made me feel anxious and uneasy. By that time, our acquaintance was easy but teetering on the edge of inadmissibility, especially when Jack was not around. One evening, we were supposed to meet Karl and his new girlfriend at a club. I was extremely jealous when I found out that Karl had committed to a girl on a permanent basis because he had been single the entire time I knew him. Even though it was no secret that he probably went to bed with different women every night, he always mentioned some girl, briefly describing some of her advantages or, conversely, some shortcomings. He was a walking commentator on women, which I found fascinating, superficial, but fascinating. This can only be explained by how smart women get caught up in stupid gossip talk. I think all women are cursed with a desire to compare, explore, judge the competition, and mock their weaknesses. In any case, Karl came alone, claiming that his girlfriend did not show up, so I shared and danced with both men, although mostly with Karl. Jack simply shrugged, assuming that Karl was a better dancer, which was true, and fitter, which was also true. Of course, Karl was flirting and holding me too close. The dress was tight, short, and backless, with built-in support, so I was braless. I'm sure Jack was watching us. Interestingly, I hardly resisted. My body was alive and trembling. Jack must be watching, my reproach only emboldened him. He pulled me closer, whispering in my ear, his breath seemed intoxicating, and his masculine scent was dizzyingly strong. You love it, baby, and so does our Jack. I didn't try to escape, which I think confirmed his observation. He was right, I loved showing off in front of Jack, and being cheeky and flirty stirred my cauldron to the limit. Oh God, I tried to recover. You're so arrogant, big boy. What do you really know about me? I tried not to sound too shrill. I know you'll love it, he grinned, pulling me towards him. You're confident, big boy. I tried to grin, but I think I blushed. God, what did I say? "Is this a challenge, baby?" he chuckled, and I trembled. At that moment, I realized that it was only a matter of time before I gave myself to this big, smug, blonde, self-confident dork. Jack never said anything about his friend's actions when we got home, and his reaction in the bedroom after my little show that night spoke volumes. He was great, and it was probably the best intimate we had ever had, and as it turned out, the best we would ever have. Karl had my phone number and my email address. His flirting texts and hints were relentless. I carefully deleted all the messages I sent and received, but I took the bait. It was only a matter of time before I was caught. Calling Jack 3 weeks before our wedding to explain that I wouldn't be home when he got back from work because I was meeting an old college friend for dinner was, of course, a complete and deceptive fabrication. I knew exactly what I was doing and I knew exactly what would happen. Karl wore me out. I only had to be with him once before I married my soulmate and settled into a life of boring contentment, stability, and satisfaction. Because that's what I wanted, right? Stability, money, a loving relationship, and a husband who would worship me and never leave me. So what did I do? That question hammered through my mind over and over again as I entered the hotel, pressed the elevator button, and ascended to room 335, the suite reserved by my fiancé's best friend, the man who would soon be having intimate with me. I was shaking with a mixture of anticipation, fear, and unspeakable guilt. Now, I use the term having an intim because that's how I justified my lust. I loved Jack and I made love to him. It was more than just night. I would finish this tonight and move on and try the forbidden apple. I knocked on the door, perhaps more softly than I intended. My breathing stopped, and I felt dizzy as my body began to tremble in response. I heard heavy footsteps and the click of the lock. I sucked in a shaky breath, barely preventing myself from fainting. "Hey, pretty girl. Are you ready?" He grinned, and his teeth flashed like in a movie. I stood there, swaying on my feet, refusing to cooperate with my strong internal orders to run. I was weak, and worse, I was lost. When I finally returned home that night, I nearly collapsed. I don't even remember how I got home. My brain was on autopilot. Jack sat in his favorite chair, twirling a glass of whiskey in his hands. "Hey, honey, how was your evening with your friends?" He looked tired. "Okay, thanks, honey." I tried to straighten up and look less like a duck. "I need to go to the toilet urgently. I'll be back soon." Of course, I've never experienced like this. I felt terribly guilty, but I accepted that I was only mortal, and like other mortals, I had my weaknesses, addictions, and needs. Now, I was addicted to mind-blowing intimate. In my defense, my body was made for this, and my essence craved it, and one big man had now awakened that need. I was hooked and knew there was no turning back from that point on. At least I hope I won't be judged as such. I love my future husband more than life itself, but there was one thing he could never give me. To satisfy that need, I would always look for a dominant lover who could fulfill it. Why I could not resist this desire, to satisfy my burning need, I cannot explain, and indeed I cannot justify my failure. Why does anyone with an addiction continue on a path of self-destruction? What I knew was that if I was caught cheating, Jack would fire me. So why did I date Karl 3 more times before we got married? And why, for God's sake, did I slip something into my new husband's drink on our wedding night and leave him on the floor while my lover officiated my wedding? Oh God, forgive me. So the guilt consumes me as I stare at the lifeless body in front of me. It's entirely my fault. I started the wheel of disaster, and fate has now fulfilled it. The first time I saw her, I was amazed. How the hell did that weakling, Jack, win her? Damn it, boy, she was incredibly beautiful, tall, slender like a gazelle, and built like a star, only more magnificent. She was obviously looking for his money, there could be no other reason. Her miniskirt barely covered her butt and those breasts. Jack introduced her, and I may have sounded rude, but, well, my God. She looked at Jack, seeking some kind of consolation, and I noticed her amazing eyes. These brilliant emeralds sought his protection. I saw something else in those eyes. There was playfulness and modesty born of submission, yet they emitted force. I could see that she loved him, but she left the door ajar, and the chain of securities seemed fragile. I might be considered a heartless man, but that's life. In any case, I will soon pick up this beauty from my old friend. I truly considered him a friend, even though I didn't have time for friends. My acquaintances were mostly made up of angry husbands, boyfriends, and stunned idiots wondering why their girlfriends, wives, and fiancés cheated. Maybe good old Jack will join the line, the angry line of confused men who would really like to get rid of me. But I really loved this guy, and I was terribly jealous of him. He was too smart and too kind. Maybe we could arrange something, some kind of agreement or something like that. Of course, I had a full address book of phone numbers ready to satisfy me. This disease of mine, if that is the correct term, has caused me to wander for many years. My father kicked me out of the house, and I think that Mary Jane, his secretary, had something to do with it. Dad found out that I slept with her, and that was the end. I had a feeling that she was sleeping with him too, but I wasn't sure. I'm the same age as Jack, and seeing him with a beautiful girl ready to settle down made me scratch my head. Maybe it's time for me to calm down, because no matter how many women of easy virtue I had, there was no satisfaction. It seemed like I needed something more, someone more permanent and someone more interesting. Jill was amazing, smart, sweet, and my favorite thing about her, she was modestly shy around me. In private, I discovered this on several occasions when Jack left us to get drinks or go to the bathroom. I would tease her or say something intimate, and she would get all giggly and turn away, embarrassed. Of course, I gradually took more and more liberties. She complained that her future husband might be seeing us, but she never pushed me away or slapped me. I knew she was mine. Wimpy Jack had lost his girlfriend, the nagging and relentless intim letters wore her out. "Hey baby, you look cute today. As you know, you can't see what I'm wearing. I just know because you always want to look good for me, not only for you, but for Jack too." "And for me?" "Yes, yes. Take them off. I don't like you wearing them." "Why?" "Since I said so. Now do as you are told." "Are you kidding? I never joke." "Did you do that?" "Yes." "Good girl. No panties today. Let's talk later." Small conversations like this kept her on edge. Waiting was key. Patience and constant nudging eventually brought her to me. Of course, my plan worked. When I heard a knock on the hotel room door, my heart smiled, and my smile pulsed. Well, anyway, you get my point. That night, I was sure that there would never be a woman like her again. I found one in a trillion, but it scared me because for the first time in my life, I realized that I felt less than a woman. That doesn't mean I showed it. I treated her exactly the way she wanted, and she loved it. But I was amazed. She owned me. This was our third meeting at the hotel. "So, I'm getting married next week, and I guess that's it," she pouted. The fact that she asked it as a question made me smirk. "No, baby, I will never give you up. If I had my way, I would stop the wedding, but I know how much Jack means to you." In fact, I wasn't sure at all. I knew she kind of loved him, and she had previously tried to explain that her love for him had nothing to do with her having a night with me. Now I knew firsthand what it was like to have meaningless intim for the sake of simple satisfaction and pleasure. But for me, everything had changed. I was in love. For the first time in my life, I experienced real feelings for a woman. Maybe I'm getting old, getting soft, whatever the reason, this woman brought down the walls of my fortress and demanded entry. "I won't let you marry him. I'll kidnap you, keep you in prison, and have a night with you, you fool." Every day, Jill laughed and kissed him. "That sounds pretty attractive, but I'll marry Jack, and that'll be the end of it." "So baby, what are we going to do?" It was very obvious that my girlfriend wanted this to continue, but how? "Well, first of all, I will let you marry a weakling, but you will have to pay a fine." She grinned. "So love, what a punishment." "I like punishments," she whispered. "The punishment is first you have to have an intimate with me on your wedding night." Shock ripped the grin from her face. My own smile hurt. "You're joking, right?" "But how?" "Sleeping pills. I happen to have some. I'll put it in his drink, and he'll sleep like a baby all night." "Oh, do you really think this will work?" She looked up from under her chestnut lashes. and I saw a twinkle reflected in those startling green eyes, although masked by her expression of false terror. Jill giggled and went to work. As soon as I slipped the crushed pills into Jack's drink, I told him to prepare it, announcing that his new wife was waiting for him upstairs. Jack looked a little distraught and a little upset, as if he wasn't sure if he'd live up to expectations. He had already drunk too much, and I seriously doubted his ability to do the job. I chuckled internally. Don't worry, old friend, your beloved wife will not be disappointed. At Jill's insistence, we spent 10 minutes at the bar, figuring she needed some time to freshen up and get ready to meet her lover. At least that's what Jack thought at that moment. She was really preparing for a lover, only I was the lover. She had given strict instructions to remain in her wedding dress and wedding attire, put her veil back on. Jack started to feel empty, so I hugged him and literally dragged him into the room. Yes, he had already had a lot to drink that evening. Jill greeted us at the door, looking absolutely stunning in white lace. I laid him on the pillows, and Jill covered him with a blanket, kissing him tenderly on the forehead and whispering that she loved him. I admit that there was nothing in her behavior except pure love, but she needed night, and her desire won out. She stood up, turned to me, and smiled nervously. She seemed uncomfortable, and to overcome her anxiety, she tried to act lighthearted. Well, my love, you are accepting this bride, but that was all she had time to say before I shouted, I agree. We had a night. My nurse smiled, a smile that spoke of real caring. It wasn't a fake, plastic smile like people pretend to have. No, her smile radiated warmth that spoke of true friendship. I learned that Katie had been my caregiver for 3 years since she started working at the hospice. Of course, others took over her shifts, but Katie was my primary day nurse, and along with another patient, I was her primary charge. It was her angelic face that I first saw when I tried to return to this world, a world that had left me behind. Katie was beautiful, radiant, and as dark as deep green jade. She wore her hair tied up tightly, but I could imagine what she would look like with those tight curls cascading over her slender shoulders. This beautiful creature took care of me twice a day, every day. I didn't understand how she could enjoy washing vegetables as much as I did, but she just giggled. Maybe I like to touch you and see if your body reacts to my touch, she smiled. It responded, and that's why I knew you weren't lost. I felt a sensation and shuddered, more attention followed her grin. I lived every day expecting you to wake up and smile at me, and you did. Her expression became wooden. But now I'm sad because you'll be coming home soon, and I'll lose you. You've been a part of my life for so long now. A tear rolled out from under one of her long black eyelashes. She squeezed my hand, and I tried to smile, but I wanted to cry with her. I didn't really know this angel, but I realized at that moment that she had been my guardian for many years. And although I had only just physically met her, I had known her spirit for a very long time. We were unwittingly connected. Katie was part of who I was now, and that thought made me very sad. I should have been thrilled to be coming home, but instead, I squeezed her hand tightly and blinked back my own tears. Thank you, beautiful, for taking care of me and believing in me. Large tears rolled lazily down her shiny dark cheeks. Hey, please, I was just doing my job, she tried to smile. Her teeth were amazing, so white and perfect. Of course, her statement was complete nonsense. Simply doing the work does not include the deep faith and love that she clearly showed me on a daily and constant basis. This, of course, was not part of her job description. No, this beautiful creature was someone very special. Needless to say, 2 weeks after returning home, I stopped at the entrance. Jill wheeled my wheelchair out onto the porch, and together we watched Katie struggle with heavy suitcases up the steps, beaming with joy. I assumed she was 25 years old, although it was difficult to tell. She was out of shape that day, and her light summer dress emphasized her beautiful figure. She looked so innocently young. I'd say she was 5 feet 4 inches. Her butt was a little full, and her breasts a little smaller than needed, but the overall package was perfect. Her hair was loose, and a light breeze blew through her tight curls. Long, chocolate brown legs moved in white sandals as she pulled the luggage. Hello, Angel. My smile stretched across my cheeks. She dropped her suitcases, jumped forward, and hugged me, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. "Hi, Mr. Stevens." "Mrs. Stevens, it's so great to be here." Katie seemed stupidly excited and was about to shake Jill's hand, but my wife pulled her in for a hug and a pat on the back. "This house is absolutely amazing." Her eyes darted around. "It's great to see you here, Katie. My husband really appreciates all your efforts in restoring him. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, too." They kissed on the cheeks, and I felt their connection. Incredibly, I had two wonderful women who cared for me, even though I was a broken creature and now practically useless. Katie's presence would free Jill from the routine duties of caring for me, washing me, and helping me with my toilet needs. The day I left the hospice, I asked Katie if she would like to be my full-time nurse and offered a huge amount of money to entice her to become my home nurse. Then I crossed my fingers. She didn't hesitate, screamed yes, and handed in her resignation the same day. I was wheeled out in my new wheelchair to finally go home and resume my interrupted life. Almost nothing had changed at home, except that there were now 3 other people living here. Yes, I accepted that my wife slept with another man in my absence and that their union produced 2 beautiful children. This man turned out to be my best friend, a man I had known since childhood. Of course, my memories and thoughts were still scattered to the wind, but I vaguely remembered Karl from the time of our marriage. I remembered him as being a bit loud, opinionated, and charismatic. The same man was now very quiet and reserved. I suspected he was hiding something, but we didn't talk much. Karl was currently working on a project in another state and had been away for 2 days. I saw Jill kiss him goodbye, and watching them hug gave me strange feelings. Yes, there was the expected jealousy, but there was also something else that scared me. This worried me, and this strange feeling of déjà vu came over me again. When I returned home, Jill had set up a special bedroom with railings, a crane, and special equipment in the basement that had recently been converted into an office. Karl built a large attached open bathroom, so I now had a self-contained living and sleeping area. But the elephant in the room remained, Jill. Of course, she introduced me to her children at the hospice, and I can't describe how strange it was to shake hands with my wife's beautiful children. The eldest, Jessica, is almost 5 years old and blonde with blue eyes like Karl, while the youngest, Jade, is red-haired and green-eyed like her mother. Only her eyes were a very dark green, and her hair was not as red, more strawberry blonde. Everything in her appearance suggested that this girl would one day become as beautiful as her mother. They were both ideal feminine creatures, and in some self-destructive way, I was glad they weren't like me. But what did all this mean for my marriage? The situation was difficult. Jill happily signed the prenup, knowing that circumstances change and marriage vows end. She argued that this was correct, considering that half of my wealth was family wealth. As she laughed playfully, she was a self-proclaimed fortune hunter. I knew that she loved me, there was no doubt about it. But she was also a realist. Thus, in the event of my accidental or natural death, my fortune would pass to my heir, or in his absence, to my younger brother, who hated me. Being second in line was never pleasant for him and was completely unacceptable. My parents both died of cancer in their 60s within a year of each other. They got married late, and Dad was 40 when I was born. My only brother, Ben, visited me only once in the hospital when I was in a coma. Katie said his visit was short and that he only asked one question: will he live? He was a scavenger circling the body. I'm glad Katie was there at the time because I was afraid he would take me off life support. A written application was submitted by him, asking to allow me to die peacefully and to turn off my machine. Jill vehemently rejected this suggestion, claiming that I was breathing naturally. This claim was disputed, and my machine was temporarily turned off. Thank God my lungs continued to breathe and my brain responded to my will to live, so I lived another day. That didn't stop my greedy brother from further trying to get me cut off through the medical board, damn idiot. In any case, the prenuptial agreement provided that in the event of my accidental death, Jill would receive a generous benefit of $1 million per year for life. It was nothing really, and at least she would have survived, but she wouldn't have lived in that mansion or driven an Aston Martin Vanquish. If we had children, the full inheritance would go to the boy at the age of 21, and in the case of only girls, at 30 for the eldest. Of course, you remember that I was told that I couldn't have children, so my brother or his eldest son would probably be the final beneficiaries if I died of old age or something. I'm sure my caring brother and his piranha family were all rubbing their hands in anticipation of the news of my death. I think I ruined their party, at least for a while. So, what about the current problem? I woke up from a coma after almost 6 years, and my wife and my best friend are partners and have 2 beautiful girls. They apparently sleep together upstairs in what was once our bedroom and in what was once our marital bed. The woman I worshipped was no longer mine alone, and that knowledge tore at my heart. But I was realistic. What would I do in such circumstances? All the medical reports said that I would never wake up and, at best, would remain in a vegetative state. Jill never intended to divorce me, and that reality was not based on the loss of her fortune. It was because she loved me and would never leave me. But she had needs, like all people. She longed for company and love. She needed to communicate and feel needed. She had desires that everyone has. As an almost lifeless plant, I could not satisfy any of these needs, so she turned to our friend, and he took over my duties. He cared for my wife, watched over her, and ultimately fell in love with her. How could I judge this negatively? Right now, they were acting strangely, unsure of how the new dynamic of my coming home would work. I tried to ignore it and pretend not to notice, but when they kissed out of habit and then realized that I was watching, they retreated nervously and touched each other only lightly. Jill was affectionate and caring around me, but the cheerfulness she had was no longer there. I was a third wheel on a bicycle, with no real benefit and clearly unnecessary. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, after Jess and Jade had been tucked into bed with the promise of a bedtime story from Uncle Jack, I called for an adult meeting. Yes, I was Uncle Jack, although I was still Mom's husband. It was difficult, but the situation had to be resolved. Oh, and the girls always squealed with delight when good old Uncle Jack's bedtime story was announced, because I twisted the stories and added my own unique twists, always offering a surprising new ending. It's time. D-Day. I wheeled my wheelchair into the middle of the room, clapped my hands, and called the meeting. Both looked around, nervous and avoiding holding hands. They knew what was coming, and their nerves were on edge. I'm sick and tired of you two acting guilty and anxious. Why can't you both act normal around me? I understand the circumstances, and I'm not judging you. You both should have moved on. So what's the problem? I looked at both lovers and tried to smile, though perhaps it wasn't convincing. Oh honey, I'm so sorry. We were told you'd never recover. Jill rushed over to my wheelchair and hugged me. We didn't mean to offend you. Hey, I'm not offended. Do you still love me? I held her hand a little timidly. Of course I do, but shoo. Do you love Karl? Her confession was barely audible. Yes, she admitted, almost in a whisper. Do you love your children? Yes, this confirmation sounded firmer. So what's the problem? Sit on Karl's lap and hug the poor guy. Jill smiled and brushed away a tear. She walked over to her lover and sat on his lap. His large arms wrapped around her. That's better, I remarked. What do we do next? Divorce? Will that allow you both to move on? Maybe, I said. I must have said something wrong because Jill burst into tears. Karl pulled out a large checkered scarf and offered it to his girlfriend. Sorry, Jack, but that's the only thing she doesn't want, Karl muttered, looking upset. Why? Because of the marriage contract? Damn, that comment brought out loud sobs. Karl continued, No, Jack. She was never worried about the marriage contract. Jill always wanted to be Mrs. Jack Stevens. My wife nodded furiously. I'm just a lover for her, an insignificant lover. This last statement was barely uttered when another fit of sobbing began. Jill hit Karl on the top of his arm as if she was angry, wiping her nose with a handkerchief. My confrontation was not going according to plan. I love you too, you big fool. More nose blowing. I tried a different approach. Okay. What if we continue as is? I paused. Jill and I are married, but my wife has an affair. So what? We live in modern times. Blended families are the norm, but we need to decide what the children will call us and how to move on without guilt and secrecy. Jill calmed down and looked at me with big red eyes that blinked occasionally. You two will continue as you have been doing for the last 6 years, as if I'm not here. For my part, I'll get used to seeing you both at ease and natural around me. If I don't see you kissing and hugging, everything is cancelled, because I will file for divorce if this is the only way to bring you both back together. I chuckled, trying to soften the threat but hoping there was enough conviction in my tone to revive their union. Now, I will call the children my adopted children. We will have a mixed marriage, only in our case, the ex, that is you, Karl, will live with us for the sake of the children. No one must know that you two are intimate and sleep together. Karl, you will always be a dad to the girls, and I'm glad they call me daddy, uncle, or whatever you two decide and are comfortable with. I shrugged as Jill pulled free and walked back to me, her gratitude evident in her smile. Thank you, my handsome and understanding husband. This idea sounds great. Jill sat on my lap and kissed my lips briefly. I inhaled her scent. God, how I missed her. Can I kiss my lover? She smiled at my confusion. I nodded stupidly. Do you mind if he touches me intimately? Another stupid nod, only this time I understood the game. Do you mind if my lover sees me without clothes? What if we make love? She smiled. Yes. You know I'll sleep in my lover's bed at night, and he won't spare me, darling, and I can be noisy. These images made me feel dizzy. But you like the idea, don't you? I tried to answer like a normal man, but I felt lightheaded. My wife grinned. Okay, Karl and I will try to move forward, but if things get too hard and stressful, you have to say something. Let's all find a safe word to use when things get too tense or weird. How about red? That's it, easy to remember. It's stop in French. Just think stop and remember the French translation. If anyone ever says this word, we will immediately stop whatever we are doing and discuss the problem. Even if we're in public, we will go to a private place and talk. Yeah, sounds good. Good. Jill quickly kissed me again, then returned to Karl and pulled him to his feet. They kissed. Finally, Jill turned to me as if checking my well-being. I smiled and raised my glass in greeting. She smiled back. We sat and talked late into the night, discussing events that I had missed both on the local scene and around the world, including the horrors of September 11th, 2001, which fortunately I did not witness with my own eyes. Finally, Jill took me to my bedroom. Karl was called, and he easily lifted me into bed. Jill covered me and kissed me goodnight. Jack, Karl and I are going to bed. If you need anything, just ring the bell, and I'll be right down. Good night, dear. Good night, buddy. I'll check on you in the morning. Come on, baby. I'm in the mood today. Karl winked at me over Jill's shoulder. I can't wait, big boy. She winked at me too, and I smiled at their playfulness. Damn, this is going to be difficult. Oh my God, this place is incredible. The view of the bay was simply fabulous. There was a tennis court and a huge pool on the horizon with views for miles. I had my own wing of the mansion, complete with 2 bedrooms and an adjoining bathroom with a huge jacuzzi. There was even a large elevator to the 2nd floor. Jack even said I could use the spare car because it was old and no one needed it. When Miss Jill showed me the machine I could use, I almost fainted. Oh my God, it's gorgeous. At first, I thought it was a Porsche. She looked very chic, fast, and pretty, silver like a diamond. Jill laughed at me, saying it was a Porsche, and pronounced the E like an A. I tried to pronounce it, but it still sounded like posh. So, I called my mom and told her I had a fancy car, and she just said, "That's good, honey," and went on for an hour about Aunt Annabelle's kidney stones. I said I was going to the jacuzzi, and she insisted I shouldn't be in the bar because that's not ladylike. I swear, Mommy is getting crazy. I told her I'd talk to her later, told her I loved her, and hung up the phone as soon as she started talking about Uncle Bobby's ingrown toenail. Thank God she lived on the West Coast. I relaxed in the bubbles and thought about my incredible recent luck. For years ago, I was a wreck almost all the time. I stuck with my idiot boyfriend, Mason, who treated me like crap and constantly abused me. I had no one else, and for some reason, I endured this abuse, partly believing that I deserved it. One night, he came home in the early hours, drunk, waving a loaded gun in my face and making threats. I cried the whole time, and in the end, he hit me. I woke up and decided to run. I didn't have anywhere to go, so I went to a shelter. This shelter was private, and the people there seemed sincere and friendly. It was the best thing I ever did, as fate later proved. The most amazing thing was how much strangers cared for me, and it was this observation that made me think about how I could get a job as a care assistant myself. Mary, the supervisor, promised to speak with the head of the foundation to see if I could be sponsored for a training program. I remember that day clearly when she practically ran to me, beaming with joy, to announce that Mr. Stevens had allocated money and guaranteed a place in the evening courses. It was around this time that I recognized him, the jerk from a security camera image of a bank robbery while enjoying a bowl of hot soup downtown. Suddenly, the soup became tasteless. The police were offering a $10,000 reward for anyone who recognized one of the criminals caught on camera, and the large black-masked figure, Bruiser, with a sawed-off gun, who glanced at the camera and grinned before the image became blurry and pixelated, was instantly recognizable. The missing bottom front tooth, those eyes under the mask, and the way he dragged his left leg, the result of an old wound, made me tremble. That idiot who glanced at the security camera, frozen as the reward amount scrolled below the image, was none other than my disgusting ex, Mason Houston. With shaking hands and quivering lips, I dialed Crime Stoppers and gave up the scumbag's identity. The police found him exactly where I thought he'd be, and the idiot was caught red-handed, still enjoying his spoils. 6 months later, he was convicted, and I received the award anonymously, a small compensation for the horrors he caused me. The money allowed me to rent a room and feed myself while I worked, studied, and attended classes in the evenings. I guess the rest is history, but imagine my surprise when my first real patient at my first real job turned out to be Jack Stevens, head of Caring for All, the same man who sponsored the shelter and paid for my qualification. The world turned out to be really small. Apparently, the poor guy fell down the stairs and hit his head hard. When I first came to him, the prognosis was grim. He was in a coma for a year before I started working and showed no signs of improvement. A relative, who later turned out to be a brother, applied to have his machines switched off, but I raised a fuss with the medical council, alleging that he sometimes reacted to me with eye movements and occasionally twitched his fingers in response to my questions. That last part was a big fat lie, but I wanted to prove that Mr. Stevens had brain activity and was not a candidate for euthanasia. I owed this man everything I had become, so a few lies were easy to justify. Thank God the decision was in his favor, and I became his primary caregiver for the next 4.5 years. Is it possible for a girl to fall in love with a man in a coma? I had no one else in my life, and perhaps it was the dreamy fantasies of a lost soul that made me want this man to wake up, take me in his arms, and carry me to his castle. During long night shifts, I often looked at the clock at midnight and wished for this miracle. Of course, I knew that he was married. I saw his wife many times. She was absolutely amazing. Her long brown hair flowed like a fiery waterfall, and her bright green eyes shone like unknown stars. Her long, flawless legs were always clicking on the linoleum floor in an endless row of beautiful designer heels. Her tight blouses showcased an impressive bust with a plunging neckline, and her designer jeans or short skirts always made me feel small and insignificant. God, I was an ex-girlfriend with an addiction, a pathetic, skinny black girl from the wrong side of town, dressed in a doctor's scrubs. But hey, a girl can dream. I knew that his wife, Jill, as she introduced herself, loved her husband deeply. But even from the very first meeting and the appearance of a man named Karl, I knew that something else was going on. I often saw them holding hands together, even sitting next to Jack, and on several occasions, I caught them kissing in the hallway or in the parking lot, which could be seen from the nurse's window. When Jill became pregnant and her baby girl was first introduced to Jack, my suspicions were, of course, confirmed. Karl and Jill had a relationship that now included having children, even though I knew for a fact that she was still legally married to my ward. So, I kept dreaming, one day my Jack would wake up, and I would be there waiting. And one day, on this beautiful, glorious May day, he actually did. I had a feeling this would happen. Over the previous months, I had been bringing life into his body. I was carefully watching his eye movements under his closed eyelids when suddenly, in the middle of the stimulus, they opened and stared straight at me. I screamed and ran after Dr. Morgan. When Jack asked me to become his full-time caregiver and move into his home, I almost died. I knew that he saw my tears and felt my grief about his upcoming departure, but I did not expect this. So here I am, and wow, the mansion and its surroundings were magnificent, a little more upscale than my noisy studio apartment next to the L. Hey, I even had a jacuzzi now. He basically called me Angel, and I had a Porsche. Jack became my only responsibility, apart from the full-time cook, Elsie. I was the only employee. Elsie was 61, lived with her husband 10 minutes from us, and came in around 11 a.m. every day, leaving as soon as she had finished cooking dinner, usually around 6 p.m. Thanks to Elsie, the house was always well stocked with food, and lunches and dinners were always exceptional. I have to say she spoiled the kids, but they loved the treats and called her Grandma Elsie, so it was all good. Of course, spending time with Jack only deepened my affection for him, but I saw that he loved his wife deeply, even though his wife was in an ongoing, stable, and intimate relationship with Karl. At first, I was shocked, but over time I got used to this strange dynamic. Karl was a huge man with an easygoing personality. I loved him, but at times, I hated him. As time passed, Karl and Jill seemed to tease poor Jack endlessly. At first, I thought it was really cruel, until one day I realized the truth. In fact, I was helping Jack shower when Jill stormed into her husband's bedroom unannounced. "Oh, sorry, honey, I didn't know you were taking a shower." Jill came in anyway and stood before us like a shining vision. Her toned, feminine body was wrapped in a short, obviously expensive designer dress with a frilly hem. She looked like a flapper from the 20s. God, how I wished my breasts looked like hers. And those legs. I simply froze in amazement, holding the shower handle and continuing to water Jack's soapy chest. I stood there with my mouth open like a statue, wrapped in a plastic apron, my hair pinned back, and no makeup on. Compared to the vision before me, I was nothing. The awareness of my inadequacy made me shrink and feel very small. How could I compete? The drain hole suddenly seemed attractive. Jill simply smiled, and her full red lips confirmed my insignificance. "Honey," she continued, "Karl and I are going to Vegas and won't be back until Sunday night. I've booked a babysitter for today, tomorrow, and Saturday night, so the girls will be fine. I'll call you from the hotel as soon as we're settled in. And I'll tell you what's going on," she giggled. "So I can get distracted a little, but I promise to call you sometime, dear." Jill grinned, leaned into the shower stall, and kissed her husband's cheek deliciously, leaving 2 perfect imprints of lipstick. Then she turned on her heel and noisily walked out of the room, her surprisingly round fifth place swaying to the unknown music of the 20s. It was then that I realized Jack loved what his teasing wife was doing. His ragged breathing told me so. "So do you like it when she teases you?" I continued to shower his body. "Do you like it when your wife says she's going to sleep with her lover?" If he hadn't been chained to the shower chair, I think he would have fallen to his knees. "You love her so much, and yet she exposes her lover to you, knowing it turns you on." Jack groaned in frustration and slammed his palm against the shower wall. His pleasure was overwhelming him, but from that moment, our relationship changed. That night, while Jill and Karl were in Vegas and the nanny and kids were asleep, I sat with Jack in his bedroom, watching an old black and white Hitchcock film on a huge wall panel. There were a lot of birds sitting all over the place, and it was kind of creepy, so I just sat and looked at Jack, sometimes smiling as he looked nervously between me and his cell phone. I think it was the phone that was bothering him, not the birds, because he looked at it the way you might look at a hissing cobra. Your beautiful wife will call soon to say that she is having a wonderful time with her lover. "Do you like it, Jack?" I tried to sound calm, but I think I was just as excited as he was. I was like a lit rocket looking for flight. He grimaced and quickly looked up, then just as quickly turned away. I saw pain mixed with life. Just think, at this very moment they are probably making love in some smoky motel. "But you like it, don't you, Jack?" The phone rang at that moment, making us both jump. But when I saw his dreamy face, I smiled. "Hello, dear," he said in a slightly breathless tone. "How was your night?" I could only hear one side of the conversation, but I quickly caught the gist. Jack was functioning as a man for the first time in 6 years. I screamed in delight as the phone clattered to the floor. Yes, it's safe to say that everything has changed. I heard Jill's anxious voice calling, "Jack, pick up the phone." I simply said, "Hi, Mrs. Stevens. Jack just fell out of his chair, he'll call you back." I giggled and hung up. Jack's memory is a capricious thing. My angel was an aspiration, an inspiration, and life suddenly seemed golden. All these feelings, mixed with confusion, swirled in my ecstatic mind. I was functioning down there again, and my angel, along with my ever-loving wife and her fierce playfulness, had restored the previously faulty connection between the neurons in my big head and the brain in the smaller one. I wanted to scream with joy. It was the Saturday after that big night. Karl and Jill were still in Vegas, and I was full of new life. I woke up early and just lay there, trying to put the puzzle pieces of my forgotten past together and waiting for my angel to help me get out of bed. I was reliving the events of last night, realizing that Katie had played on my sick fantasies. I should have been shocked, but I was delighted. I may have mentioned this before, but I want to reiterate how wonderful Katie is. Okay, she's not in Jill's league when it comes to external perfection, but how can you compare a gazelle to a koala? What is perfection? Katie loved me. I'm not stupid enough to deny it. She constantly looks at me, her big brown eyes radiating warmth and adoration. It's like she sees me as some kind of god that needs to be worshipped. I'm nothing compared to a real man. I am not only broken but also completely unremarkable. I'm definitely not Karl and absolutely nothing special, but my wife, Jill, saw in me something more than just money. There's no doubt that she loved me despite her relationship with my best friend and the fact that the two of them had 2 beautiful children together. I mean, what else could she do when I was in a coma? Yes, it hurts like hell, but I'm also happy for her that she found someone who will love and care for her, who better than the one I knew and trusted. Now, back to my shadow, my angel Katie. How do we fit in? The quiet knock on the door was just a formality, because verbal consent was not required for entry. The smiling, dark chocolate face smiled widely as she entered. "Hello and good morning, Mr. Stevens. I hope you slept well." There was a mocking smile in those mesmerizing eyes, dark perfection wrapped in a white apron, gilding around the room, uselessly picking up a fallen pillow, parting the heavy curtains, and pouring a glass of ice-cold water. I was sitting in her posh, silly girl's wheelchair, attached to the roof with elastic straps. It was my car, the same one I was driving at the time of the accident. She was over 6 years old but had low mileage, and my angel adored her, driving her like a pro. I was amazed at her desire to press her foot as hard as she could into the floor to help stop this damn projectile that she considered her daily soft way of moving. I even curiously examined my leg to see if it would twitch even just a little because my brain was definitely sending all the right signals. Feeling frustrated and afraid, I decided to verbally squeal instead. "Damn! Look, some bus just left without a signal." But Angel just sighed, rushed to the right, switched down, downshifted, and accelerated as if she was imitating a space rocket. Until 3 months ago, the girl didn't even have a driver's license. The turn into the shopping center parking lot was executed as if she were one of those precise drivers fitting an overly large car into an equally small gap. She pulled the handbrake, stroked the clutch, and in the next moment, we were sitting at the curb, perfectly parallel parked in the handicapped area. The only thing that gave away the maneuver was the lingering smell of burnt rubber, and about 100 curious spectators. Angel jumped out of the low car in a light summer dress that reached her knees, running around the hood, grinning like a chimpanzee, and showing off to the maximum. Soon, she put the chair back in place, and I sat in confusion and shock within its confines, my white fingers gripping the armrests and still trying to come to my senses. She was amazing. I realized over time just how much this was true, because she had this natural talent for thinking fast, learning fast, and acting fast. I promised her a shopping day, and in the absence of my wife, I thought today would be a good time. Usually, I would just book some upscale boutique for the day and let the staff fuss over her, trying on clothes, But no. Angel wanted to go to the damn mall. I can't remember ever being in a place like this. It was terribly crowded and smelly, but this was Angel's territory. Now, I've had Angel in my chair before, but never in such a crowded place as we found ourselves on that busy Saturday afternoon. Of course, I was sitting in the front as she was pushing me from behind. Have you ever been on one of those crazy rides where there is a huge screen in front of you with all sorts of obstacles and a certain death approaches you at high speed? You dodge at the last moment, only to be faced with yet another form of imminent death? Try this, but in reality, for 2 hours, zigzagging from dress store to lingerie store, from food court to cafe. I wanted to be sick. She walked through this dense crowd like a bat, relying on radar, making split-second decisions to turn right, dive left, or stop in place while avoiding collisions in a split second. This experience made me appreciate carnival rides for how dull they are. Either way, Angel enjoyed every crazy moment, giggling and dancing with joy at every purchase I approved. I asked her to try on some pretty cute dresses and even encouraged her to leave the fitting rooms in her underwear. At first, she was shy and self-conscious, but as the day went on, she became more and more confident. Of course, I praised and applauded her, and it wasn't just to boost her confidence. I did it because she was a beautiful exotic creature. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, the wife had no choice but to betray her husband. What do you think about this part of the story? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next video.